Good morning and welcome to the second meeting in 2025 of the Scottish Commission for Public Audit. Now, the first item on our agenda is to agree to take agenda item 3 in private. Are we all agreed? Agreed. We are agreed. The next agenda item today is to take evidence on Audit Scotland's budget proposal for 2026-27. And members can find a copy of the budget proposal along with a covering letter from the Auditor General for Scotland in paper 1 of their meeting papers. So I will welcome to the meeting Stephen Boyle, Auditor General for Scotland, Colin Crosbie, Chair of the Board of Audit Scotland, Vicky Bibby, Chief Operating Officer, Kenny Oliver, Executive Director, Innovation and Quality, and Wakas Sanawar, Head of Finance for Audit Scotland. And I'd like to invite Colin Crosbie and then the Auditor General to make short introductory statements.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Chair and members. Members, the most straightforward way of introducing our budget proposal for 26-27 is that it's about delivering our mission, the mission of providing assurances on billions of pounds of spending and helping improve public access, improve public services. The proposal aims to support this by achieving a balance, the balance between investing in and shaping the future of public audit, ensuring our organisation has the structure, skills, resources and workforce for the future, sustaining the ongoing delivery of high-quality independent audit of Scotland's public spending and services, and being efficient and prudent in our use and stewardship of the public money we receive at the standard you would expect from the nation's public spending watchdog. I look forward to your questions and to discussing the transformational changes that are underway and what we're doing to be as efficient and as effective as possible. I'll hand over to Stephen Boyle as Accountable Officer.
Many thanks. And good morning very much to the Commission. We're very grateful for your time and your consideration of our budget proposal. Chair, as all of us are aware of the pressures and fiscal challenges that Scotland's public services are facing, our budget proposal is set out in that context and sets out how we aim to continue delivering services today and making those necessary transformational changes for the years to come. Neither of these are easy, and we don't take either for granted. Achieving them means looking very hard as ever at what we spend to deliver public money, and also, as is reflected in our budget submission, accepting that there will be some risks in our budget proposal and then how we deliver our work. Our proposal has a resource requirement request from the Scottish Consolidated Fund of £15.81 million. This includes a rise in our core costs of £55,000, 0.4%, while absorbing inflation and increased employer national insurance contributions, which the SCPA kindly supported us with in last year's budget. It also includes ongoing investment from the SCF in audit modernisation, and this is crucial in ensuring that public audit remains fit for the future. Through our budget, we will also deliver more than £2 million in further efficiencies, making sure that we provide the most value we can for the public money we spend. And Chair, I'm content to leave it at that, and as ever, we'll all do our utmost to answer the Commission's questions this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now open up for questions. I'll actually start with the first question, which is in connection with the savings that you've made, the efficiency savings. Now, that's coming in at just over 2.1 million. How much of that is recurring and how much of it is non-recurring expenses?
So I can give a little bit of detail, first of all, actually, on that, and maybe turn to Vicky, she can set out a bit of detail. The Commission will remember that one of the biggest aspects of our savings is our staff and vacancy management factors. So the proposal is that we'll continue to operate with a vacancy factor of 5%. That in itself is non-recurring. So in terms of kind of the individuals and the actual makeup of it, but it's a remaining target. So it's a little bit of both in that respect. It's a measure of how we manage our staff costs. Audit Scotland staff costs are about 63–64% of our total expenditure. And we use this as a mechanism because inevitably there are starters, there are leavers during the course of the year. And this is something of a recruitment constraint that we voluntarily apply. So if you allow me, Chair, it's something of both in that respect. It's a recurring target that we have, but the individual aspects of it will vary from one year to the next. The other aspects, I'm maybe happy to turn to Vicky to set those out, if that's helpful.
Thank you. The savings of the 2 million are referred to in paragraph 48 of our submission. And as the Auditor General said, the largest part of that is the vacancy factor, which is non-recurring. The reduction in the establishment could be recurring into a number of years, but this is linked with our overall workforce planning. And we are linking that very much with our future needs around two things: audit modernisation and the work we're doing around the use of technology, but also being aware that we are in 2026 going to be going out for consultation on our future code of audit practice and the procurement. So our future workforce will be dependent on both of those things. So whilst we are trying to look at ensuring that our overall staff numbers are as efficient as possible, that work is ongoing around what those needs will be into the future. What the elements that I can say are recurring in that list is the reduction in property costs, and we previously presented to the Commission our approach to property across the Edinburgh and Glasgow offices, which has looked to reduce the Edinburgh office by half, but expand the Glasgow office in relation to the demand from our staff of increased numbers through in the West. That has netted off us savings due to the rent prices across differentiation across the two sides of the country. So those costs are recurring as we have previously set out in our plan. We are... Yes,
on that.
Apologies.
The whole 270,000 relates to rent savings or not? It was just to clarify what you were saying there.
So it will relate to rent, but also to some rates elements as well. We could provide you the breakdown of the element that's rent and rates for your reference following, but it will be made up of a combination of the rent, rates, and then the other electricity, etc., etc.
It would be interesting seeing the breakdown, because this has been a recurring thing, the property savings.
Yeah, we can provide that.
Chair, I don't know, Wackas maybe have some of that further detail at the moment.
Thank you. Good morning. So out of that £270,000, 220 relates purely to rent, and that's part of our 10 years estate strategy, which is expected to return £2.2 million in rent savings over that period. The balancing amount of £50,000 relates to a mixture, as Vicky said, of rates, as well as savings in other areas such as maintenance and utility bills, etc. So 220 is purely rent, and the balancing 50 is comprised of various other elements.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Wackas. The rest are in-year savings, non-recurring. So it would just be the recurring element is the property element we've just discussed.
So, just to be clear, the only non-recurring element, the only recurring element is the 220,000 in rent savings, really.
That I could see as guaranteed at the moment. There might be elements in the establishment numbers that might be recurring, but until we do our continued workforce planning, I couldn't guarantee that at the moment. So we've reduced our establishment by numbers this year, largely in relation to graduates, but there is a fluctuation in that every year.
So it's going to be quite challenging, actually, to make this up for the next year. Given you've got efficiency savings of 2.1 million, and only 220,000 of that is recurring.
Well, as the budget, sorry, Stephen, the budget forecast is the 5% vacancy factor, which I think we will have as a recurring theme throughout our budget, as discussed with the SCPA last year. I think what we would like to do, though, is again link that in with our sophisticated workforce planning to be looking at the vacancy factor to see whether that is something that we would want to continue going forward. But we are achieving the vacancy factor by delaying recruitment in year when a vacancy arrives. That is how we are achieving that vacancy factor. So it's not a recurring saving. But we will continue to have that principle of the vacancy factor going forward.
Okay. And just to ask, you previously talked about introducing the 35-hour working week. Has that now been implemented, and has the impact of that been absorbed within the staff structure?
Yeah. Yes, it has been. We've done, we were at a 36.25-hour working week before we moved to the 35-hour working week. And we have worked with PCS union and our staff to look at ways in which we can accommodate that without impacting on direct delivery. So, for example, use of efficiencies for where we might have had an hour meeting, trying to be stricter and reducing that to a 50-minute meeting, for example. I mean, it equates to a reduction in 15 minutes per day. So we've tried to accommodate that through efficiency. It was an agreement with the union that we wouldn't be accommodating the reduction in the working week with an increase in our workforce. So we've worked collaboratively to deliver that, and it is working well.
Can I turn to Richard Leonard for a question?
Thank you very much indeed, and good morning. Can I go back to that major part of your savings plan, which is the 5% vacancy rate or vacancy factor? I mean, I suppose, first of all, that is quite a blunt instrument, isn't it? And it's not something entirely within your control. Secondly, as we've discussed before, they can also be quite detrimental to the morale of the workforce if people are leaving and it's a deliberate plan not to replace them. So how are you managing that? And I suppose underlying that, I'm challenging you to say, is it an ethical thing to do?
I'll maybe start, and again, Vicky and other colleagues can come in as well. So you're right, it is a blunt tool to... I think, but for the time being, it feels an appropriate one as well, to ensure that we are challenging ourselves, that our request of the Scottish Consolidated Fund and of public bodies is reasonable. So we've now had it for a couple of years, or just over a year actually. This will be going into our third financial year in its use. We are tracking along 5% for the current financial year in its use. And I guess the metrics about, say, well, how good or otherwise a tool is this. So all the factors that you mentioned, are possible. And I think if you surveyed our colleagues, does everybody like our vacancy factor and the recruitment board that we operate? They probably say no. They find it a constraint. But I think for some of the reasons of where we are as an organisation and the changes that are happening with the auditing profession, our basic, we are using public money. So I think we have to satisfy ourselves that the posts that we have in our establishment, they still remain the right ones when a vacancy arises. So this is not a programme as a step before or a couple of steps before a whole restructure of the organisation. But we are alongside this thinking really carefully about our future operating model. So the auditing profession is going to change, and we just need to be satisfied that we're giving ourselves the right levers to deliver what's required of us in public audit, and that our cost base remains the right one. Almost always when a vacancy arises, we'll go through a process, and the recruitment board, who's made up of the executive team and support with WACAS and finance and our HR colleagues, is that we will support the refilling of that post. But there are some that think, okay, is that still necessary to deliver the services that are required upon us? So I think for the time being it feels the right one, and we'll continue to explore whether the process is right and that the 5% target is also the right one. The last thing we want to do, just to hopefully to reassure the SCPA, is that this is going to override either the quality of our work or the delivery requirements that are with us.
But just so I understand how it works, is there a default position? Is it automatic that a vacancy, the filling of a vacancy is delayed? Would there be some positions that were so important to the organisation that you would begin recruitment straight away? Or, how does that work? Or if you reach a 10% vacancy factor in the 10th month of the 12 months of the year, would you then just set it aside, and if people left at that point, you would recruit immediately? I mean, how does the dynamic of that work?
Well, happy to say that. Actually, I'll bring Vicky in to say a bit more. But so for some posts, you're absolutely right. We have key post dependencies in some parts of the organisation, absolutely. And if some of those colleagues decided that their career lay outside of Audit Scotland, we wouldn't wait artificially for the next scheduled recruitment board in order to support recruitment. And other factors, we'll try and do it in a proactive way as well. So particularly for our training programme and use of modern apprentices. So we had a meeting earlier this week of the recruitment board, and colleagues say this is our proposals for recruitment into the spring and summer of next year. So, for example, summer internships were one of the considerations that we spoke about. The recruitment boards scrutinised that and supported some of our proposals. So it's not an entirely reactive process. So we're making sure that we've got that right balance upon it. But again, Vicky, you're leading much of this, and we can set some more of that out.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the premise of it is that we want to be able to demonstrate that we are recognising the pressures on public sector funds, and that we are playing our role in that. We'd previously had a vacancy factor of 2% running for a number of years, and it was last year we increased it to the 5%. And at that point, we introduced the recruitment board. And essentially, it's twofold. All posts now have to come to the recruitment board. And whilst that, to deliver on the vacancy factor, does result in a delay, there are advantages of it as well, because we take a whole organisation approach to looking at the needs of recruitment in our organisation. We are improving with rigour our workforce planning, as I said, linked to our audit modernisation, and it allows us to have that collective discussion about where posts are going and how we want to evolve, because we have arrangements that we can pivot the organisation when vacancies arise. We really want to use those opportunities to think, is our operating model the right one? So we use the recruitment board to do that as well. We have fixed times that we have the recruitment board, but we do have extraordinary meetings if something arises. I have to say, colleagues are very good with us. If there's planned retirements or people are going, staff, I'm very grateful to them, do give us a lot of notice, and we can work through that. But we also anticipate where things are coming. So on a monthly basis, we do monitor the vacancy factor. We discuss it regularly with the union as well, because the budget is about balancing delivery quality, our share of public sector pressures, but as highlighted, also managing staff well-being. So at the moment, we think the balance is okay, but we are keeping a very keen eye on it and looking at it with other stats across the organisation as well.
Okay, thank you. I think other members of the Commission may also have questions on staffing, but I just want to move on to another area, which is the future of public audit model. And you say in your submission, I think it's paragraphs 34, 35, you talk about a root and branch review of public audit. Is that something which you anticipate will deliver savings, for example?
So yes, you're right. We are conducting a thorough review of how public audit in Scotland will be delivered, together with colleagues in Audit Scotland, the board, the Accounts Commission and myself. We've had informal engagement so far with the Scottish Parliament, committees, users of public audit, as well as public bodies themselves, together with professions. to get an early sense and feedback about how is the current setup working, and then as we move into the early part of next year, consultation on some of the formalities of it. So the new code of audit practice that is being developed with under Kenny Oliver and his colleagues who've been leading that project. The main opportunity that the code sets out is for the Auditor General and the Accounts Commission to set out how they wish public audit to be delivered, typically in each 5-year cycle. So this will be from the start of the 27-28 financial year and for the 5 years thereafter. The efficiencies, I guess you can look at it in two ways. One is that public audit is there to support assurance and to support the delivery, or that public services are run well. So we'd hope intrinsically in all of that is that provides, as part of the kind of overarching mechanism that public money is well spent. So we think efficiencies therein and consideration through other mechanisms of the impact and insight that Audit Scotland provides. One of the things we're thinking really carefully in terms of the new code is we think we can be more proactive in supporting good practice. So thinking carefully about that part of our role. And then about, what does it mean for our cost base and our own efficiencies? I think the answer is we don't know yet. One of the key parts of our the project that we'll get into more fundamentally during 2026, following the consultation on the code and the views of Parliament and others on that. At that point, once the code is settled, we will procure audit services from, again, as I mentioned, that we have about a third of the work currently done by audit firms. And of course, that brings some uncertainty, some risk about what the cost of the procurement might be, and then the delivery models that come from that. So I think at the moment the answer is we don't know yet whether that will result in fundamental changes to our cost base. What I'd like to reassure the Commission this morning, though, is that we are ever mindful about affordability in the cost of the delivery of audit. We will consider hugely through Audit Scotland and then recommendations to the Audit Scotland Board. Colin might want to talk a wee bit about this too, about just that oversight that how public audit is not at any price, actually, and very careful that that's delivered appropriately for the next 5-year cycle.
Yeah, it's an interesting question in terms of what will the future model look like. And I've got to answer this carefully because I don't know whether you're expecting a radical overhaul in the exercise or not.
I'm a revolutionary, Mr. Crosby.
Well, a revolution. Well, let's just say that the board might have thought we were going to start off with a revolution, but rapidly you get to the point that because of international standards and the way you do audits, then at best you get to an 80-20 rule where 80% will be broadly as it is, and where you are is in the 20% to say, can we make useful change to get a better outcome? So I simply intervene in what Stephen's saying just to put a balance into that, so you don't think there's going to be a revolution, whether you wanted it or not. And actually, it's the 20% in terms of what we can achieve, so that there may be some change, but it's not going to be enormous radical movement. And the interesting thing is that whilst you've got the Auditor General and the Chair of the Accounts Commission asking what should be done, there's a third leg in that partnership, which is to Audit Scotland saying how it's going to be done, taking account of the range of statutory and controls as to how we do it. So it was just to, I think, at least reassure the committee that, yes, there will be change, but it's not going to be a revolution.
Okay, well, my final question then is just on the balance that you have at the moment, which you've already referred to, Auditor General, that private firms carry out around about a third of the public audit work in Scotland at the moment. I mean, what's your current market intelligence telling you about that? Because I think we've heard before that there may be some increase in the costs that the private sector would expect to enjoy in carrying that kind of work out. And what's that done then? Because you said, I think, the year 2027, 28 is when you expect to be entering into that next 5-year cycle. That's not too far away. So at this stage, what are you doing to understand where the market is? and consider whether there are different options that the board, led by Mr Crosby, will need to consider.
Yeah, very happy to. Actually, I'm sure Vicky and maybe Colin again might want to say a bit more about this. So as I mentioned, we currently have 6 providers, and we procured them 3.5, 4 years ago. The procurement is not entirely fixed price, but it's broadly fixed for the duration of the 5-year cycle. We inflate it each year by whatever the Audit Scotland pay award was for the previous year. So our costs, as we set out in our budget proposal for firms in 26-27, will grow by 3.8%, which was the Audit Scotland pay award for the previous financial year. That, I think, inherently transfers risk away from Audit Scotland onto firms. And although there are some movements alongside that for, as the fee model works in such a way that there's broadly a set fee, but that can vary if an auditor with agreement with the public body have to undertake more work than would be considered necessary. So examples can be the implementation of new auditing standards, or in some cases where a public body just hasn't been reasonably ready to support the delivery of an audit. That can result in additional audit charges. We're engaging widely with our existing cohort of firms to try, and we do that through a range of mechanisms. Myself and Vicky, for example, we meet individually with each firm at least once a year. We gather all of the firms together on a number of occasions throughout the year. And then our audit quality and appointments team have regular, what we'd call kind of contract level engagement to gauge with the firms how that's progressing. And it varies, Mr Leonard, in terms of what we're understanding would be of the appetite of our current providers to continue working in this market. None of that's set in stone yet, though, I would say, because clearly they will make their formal decision when we formally go out to procure through appropriate tender arrangements. What we have seen is some movement, though, and I think if indicative of how providers are in other parts of the UK, their appetite to continue servicing public audit contracts is variable, and that will be an opportunity cost commercial decision that they'll make as individual firms. In response to the likely and potential change in their existing providers, we're engaging with the wider market of firms. So with smaller and medium-sized providers in Scotland, we're engaging with the professional bodies to highlight to their members. In fact, just had a meeting just in the past couple of weeks with some of the institutes, just to kind of make them aware through the code consultation that there will be potential opportunities for the providers. Perhaps one of the things that, just to highlight to the SCP finally, before, if there's anything Vicky else wants to highlight, the Code of Audit Practice is giving consideration to how we are proportionate especially for some of the very small public bodies that we have in Scotland. We currently ask all the audit firms and the in-house team in Audit Scotland to audit to international standards on auditing. But if we adopted, and this will be a key part of the consultation, if we adopted an alternative assurance regime for some of the very small public accounts, mirroring what Audit Wales, Companies Act, charities legislation has done, that might also open up other avenues for some of the small and medium-sized audit and accountancy firms in Scotland who might not be able to service what we currently structure the procurement of £1 million, what we call procurement lots, probably beyond either their organisational capacity and even some of the ethical risks that they might be absorbing with that. So there's a range of variables, but perhaps hopefully to reassure you and the Commission, we're exploring all of these, very keen to take feedback from Parliament and from professional bodies and public bodies before we go through that process during 2026. I've said quite a lot on that, actually. Maybe if you're content, Vicky, to say anything else that she wishes.
Just a couple of things in addition to what the Auditor General has said, just to reassure you that we are wanting to attract as many entrants, new entrants and existing providers into the market when we do go out to tender. We can do that in more earnest once we've gone out in February with our draft code. We can go out and speak to new firms, and because they can see what it is really that we are looking for them to deliver on. And so we will be actively targeting a number of firms, as the Auditor General has highlighted. But in addition to that, we have taken a lot of feedback on the size of the lots that we put out to tender. So last time it was an active decision to have a bulk of a £1 million lots, because we thought that mix would be attractive. There are other options that we can do around maybe for some of the smaller, medium-sized firms, and then also the types of bodies we put out for some of the bigger firms, which we know their audit methodology has changed quite significantly over the last 5 years, that might be better suited to certain types of audited bodies. So we're trying to really think of all of those elements to be as tactical as possible to encourage the market to arrive at that competitiveness, because we are very aware of the price increases. We've got evidence of what is happening down in England, where the costs are far exceeding where the costs that we would be comfortable paying for public audit. And recognise and promote the advantages of working for public audit. It's a 5-year contract, which reduces the risk for a number of private firms. Also, there's not cash flow threats as well. So we really want to promote the good for working in public audit as part of that invitation to tender as well.
Yeah, I'd take that point completely. Thank you very much, Colin.
Thank you. Mark Ruskell.
Yeah, I wanted to very briefly go back to the 5% vacancy target, and I'm interested in, whether this effectively reinforces a kind of culture of change within the organisation. So if staff are looking at posts that are not being filled, is that then prompting conversations around their own workload, efficiencies, and how that is playing out in terms of the overall culture of the organisation and the other projects that you're working on around audit modernisation? It feels like there's a lot of change happening.
I think you're right, actually, and I think maybe Vicky and Kenny might want to say a few words on this. In general terms, you're absolutely right, Mr. Ruskell. There is change happening in Audit Scotland. So we have, as well as just discussed with Mr. Leonard, the Future Public Audit Model programme. We have a change programme running in some of our digital investments on audit modernisation, how we're deploying our people, and this has largely been the cycle we've been operating in now for a number of years. It's becoming more comfortable with change as an organisation. So we've changed, just now beginning to be embedded, how we are coaching, how we're developing our people through changes to our year-end review and appraisal processes. And also the vacancy factor is part of how we are trying to strike the right balance between our efficiencies and also taking opportunities to be considered about how we are deploying our people, what our resource model looks like, and what our future of Audit Scotland in terms of the people that we have. Vicky may want to say more on that, but I would absolutely recognise the point is that change is a feature now, and we have to, as an organisation and our colleagues, to become more comfortable with that.
Could that be unsettling, though? If you see a colleague's post not being filled, does that not automatically create a pressure?
So, in those kind of small circumstances, yes, I think that it will be a feature of how Audit Scotland will change. The technology is here; it is coming at us further down the line. How audit organisations deliver their work is changing. What we have to do is to make sure that we are communicating clearly, transparently. We have a programme of coaching and development that's going to happen during the early part of next year to support our line managers, to have those considered, careful conversations, not just about the vacancy factor and recruitment, but across the piece that we are better at change and how we communicate that with our colleagues. So, but I wouldn't want to kind of say that the change won't be here, and can reassure everybody that what we've grown used to won't always be that way. So I think it's to recognise that this is a feature of our work. Okay. Vicky?
Yeah, absolutely, and we recognise it. We're very we aim to be very transparent with staff, and I hope they feel that, I'll come on to the stats that we've got around how staff are feeling, but we're putting a lot of energy into conversations around change and trying to reassure staff around the changes that are taking place. But actually, a lot of staff want these changes. The changes that we are talking about are in relation to feedback. We do a lot of staff consultation. We do our best companies survey, and we do a number of surveys throughout the year. And actually, I think the bit that's most frustrating for staff in terms of the sense we're getting is, can we please get on with it? In terms of the, people are really excited about Apex and our new audit modernisation, the way we're wanting to resource audits. So we are talking a lot, we do a lot of staff communication, regular conversations with the union around this, and particularly very transparent around the vacancy factor. So we have this conversation that a modern organisation don't feel threatened by the advent of technology, but we must all have a mindset that learning is the new key skill you need. Your ability to learn and your eagerness to learn is the ethos we want in the workforce. And we talk regularly about it's not just what we do, but how we do it and our openness and our approach to doing that. But we're putting focused investment in on staff around change. In the board, Colin as chair, Jackie as our chair of REMCO have spoken to staff about this as well. So we know that you cannot over-communicate on change and having an openness to talk about concerns. And we did get, we have highlighted that we reached the 1-star in the best companies survey, and we're in the top 25 organisations in Scotland, we're in the top 10 accountancy firms, and we're in the top 100 large companies in the UK. So we're really pleased with these stats. We're not being complacent, because we absolutely have to take staff on this journey with us. Okay. I think the majority of staff are comfortable. Inevitably, there will be staff, as the change actually implements, can feel quite uncertain. So because their day-to-day role, what they're familiar with, will of course be different. So we're actively looking at ways and talking with the union and talking with management at all levels about how we can support staff in that transition.
Okay, thanks for that. So I wanted to move on to the changes then that have taken place, particularly the 4 whole-time equivalent posts that have been removed from the staffing baseline. And I wanted just to get a bit more understanding about how that is being absorbed across the organisation. So my understanding that is all those whole-time equivalents are related to professional trainees. So can you just say a little bit more about that, and particularly, you know, given the pressures that's on the organisation, given your own objectives, you know, I think you talk about, you know, getting back on track to reach target levels. How does that decision link into that?
So there is, because the professional trainees have a 3-year cycle, there's not an active decision that we're reducing our graduate intake. This is just as part of the cycle, actually. We've got the need for 4 staff less in the intake this year, but we are actually looking at, so that's the net impact. We have reduced some numbers in business services, but we've actually replaced some higher grades with promoting more modern apprentices. So I think what our overall assumption is, whilst the workforce is generally, for 350 odd staff, generally static at the highest level, there are fluctuations and movements in terms of the makeup of staff within that. And that's what we're wanting to do as part of our workforce planning. We feel it's very important that we have opportunities for trainees and graduates, so that whilst there is a 4 reduction in staff, this is not, for this year, we're not looking to reduce the intake on a consistent basis. We want to ensure we have got a pipeline. We are looking at how we increase our school leaver programme as well. But we must wrap this all in our workforce planning in terms of our audit modernisation of what we need. There is a talking about change, there is a large review of our business support services taking place at the moment in terms of how we are utilising the way we do resourcing, the way we do support, and again, maybe moving, the headline might not change, but re-gearing where the support is for the organisation. So whilst, yes, there's an overall reduction of 4, which largely is from the graduate intake, there is movement, as set out in our submission, around grades, and we're being very active around that. However, as the Auditor General highlighted earlier, we had a recruitment board this week and we approved another 13 posts going forward in terms of meeting that future operating model.
Okay, so the message I'm getting then is that broad pipeline of apprenticeships, graduate trainee posts, professional trainee posts, that is consistent, but there may be some variation from year to year.
Exactly.
According to, changes within the organisation, promotions and everything else. Okay.
Chair, maybe I think Colin wants to come in for a moment on this as well, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Russell, mention's been made of the board. I think it's probably just worth taking a moment to say the board actually absolutely reinforces everything that's been said by Vicky and Stephen. The board's very aware that in the environment in which we live these days, status quo actually is not an option. And whilst one has to be very mindful of those who are slow to change or don't want to change and do everything you can to help them, by far and away the majority actually appreciate that change is vital and embrace it and move forward to the benefit of the organisation. So that there's whilst the status quo can give comfort to some, it actually is very uncomfortable for others. And if you want to retain staff, then actually a constant change, because everybody's aware of the fact that things are changing, that techniques are changing, modernisation's happening. And interestingly, if I refer back to a meeting which the 4 chairs had, it's quite interesting that certainly in our English equivalent, who've embraced a farther ahead in terms of modernisation, their staff are really excited by the change because they appreciate the value that's coming in terms of making them do a better job and encouraging them to do a better job and taking some of the more routine functions out in an acceptable way. And the other bit about change, when we're speaking about workforce planning, is that the board are fully aware of the fact that, and I think we're probably on minute in having said that the one thing that will be absolutely certain about a workforce strategy and plan is that it won't be right, because in 2 or 3 years' time it will bound to be different because of the pressures of what we have to have.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Jimmy Green.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I've got quite a wide range of ground to cover, so I'll just get straight into it. I think I'll start with some of the more budget-related questions that I had, and I'll maybe in this case refer to the appendix on page 21, which is essentially a sort of 3-year snapshot of where you're at, and just pluck some numbers out of that. I think just looking at that. We tend to look at year-on-year comparisons with budget asks, but I think it's quite helpful actually to look at the 24-25 versus 26-27 proposal in terms of what you're asking from us. I think one of the things that struck me the most is really that what seems to be quite stable is your income. You're sitting around the £20,500,000 around there or thereabouts each year, and there is some variance in that, but not a huge amount. The amount you're forecasting for next year is pretty similar to the 24-25. Interestingly, how much you're paying to external companies, that's actually gone down by about £1 million over that same period. So how much is going out the door? So your revenue's stable. How much you're paying to the third of those those private 6 firms that are doing a third of your work is actually coming down. But if you look at how much you asked from the SCF in 24-25, it was about 10.5 million. And next year it's jumped up to 16. It's a massive jump. And we have to justify that. How do you justify it?
So I'd like to cover all of those points actually, and hopefully in answering it will come up with what we think is kind of the reasonable basis for the request that we're making in our budget proposal. On income, first of all, you're right as the numbers set out. Our income is largely stable. Of course, our income is derived from a combination of fees together with support that we receive from the consolidated fund. There are movements, though, within that, in that there are some changes to public bodies that result in a change to our cost-based audits that we're required to do. Of particular note that will be coming through in 26-27, we expect, is the anticipated audit of some of the railway companies that will be coming. We understand that there'll be recent or soon to be a recently laid legislation for those to be subject to audit appointment by the Auditor General. So that will result in some changes. And there are always some changes around the margin. One of the things that's not reflected in this budget proposal, but is that were there to be any structural changes to public bodies, that would something have a particular note and consequence to our income base. And that's something we would, of course, come back to the SCPA for further discussion in due course. But clearly, that we have no insight or knowledge of what any changes to public structures would be. But that's something that we're always alert to. I'm happily turn to Wakas in a moment if he wants to say any more about the amounts that we pay to firms. The only thing I would add is that it is subject to fluctuation, because some of this can be, particularly if it's a snapshot of a previous set of year, as to when audits are completed, and then how we are measuring work in progress alongside the invoicing arrangements. So we can say a bit more about that if it's helpful. And on the request from the Consolidated Fund in totality of why that is larger, I'll bring colleagues in that can maybe set that out in a bit more detail. One of the significant things within that, though, is the change in the delivery of our audit modernisation project that wouldn't be reflected in 24-25. And because of some of the delays in the delivery of that project during the current financial year, what our request also captures is the request of the SCPA to support our request that the money that we had anticipated spending on audit modernisation during 25-26, because of some of the delays in the software, the anticipated software arrangement that we'll have with a third party, is that we expect now that spend will be moving into 26-27. That's part of the kind of largest chunk of some of those movements. I'll pause and happy to turn to Wakas and then maybe Kenny, if there's anything, and then hopefully that kind of addresses your or gives you the assurance you're looking for, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Stephen. So in terms of the increases on the fees to firms, that's linked directly to our pay award. So we're contractually obliged to offer the same increase to the firms that is awarded to our staff. So that increase that you're seeing there of the 323k versus the prior year is as a result of the 3.8% pay award that was awarded and agreed with the unions last year, and that is what will be honoured to the firms going into the next year. So hopefully that explains the increases in the fees firms. But is there anything you'd like to add, Kenny?
Thank you. Yeah, on audit modernisation, so whilst the modernisation project itself has 4 interdependent work streams, the core work stream that is in the budget presented is around the system replacement for our audit management software. The cost envelope across the 3-year project that was presented to you previously remains unchanged. What has changed is the rephasing of that project based on the system being under a significant update at present that is due to be completed by the end of March, which will be a precursor to the development of the system for our environment. Hence the rephasing of the current year cost that we provided back to the Consolidated Fund last month, moving into 26-27.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the points is also worth highlighting, I think, on the appendix you refer to. One of the significant variables is a non-cash item, is pensions, actually. So there was, I think, in total is nearly £1.8 million of pension. Although it's identified as income, it's not really income. It's in reflect just of valuations of non-cash pension costs. That's typically met from annually managed expenditure, AME funding each year. So we have some certainty, but not always a lot, in terms of what the valuation will be of any accounting pension disclosures that we need to make in our accounts. So we've indicated there that that's going to be, although it's on the income side of the expenditure statement, it's a debit balance of £224,000. So it's indicative of uncertainty and some movements that we expect will take place. We wait to get the information from the pension fund that's subject to consideration by the relevant actuaries.
I was going to flag that. I mean, I do recall having this conversation last year that jump of what was classed as income of 1.7 million became effectively a deficit to you, and that money had to be recouped via the SCF. And my concern is that you're simply forecasting next year replication of this year, but you haven't had your statement in. And what happens if that comes in with a £2 million reduction in value? You know, suddenly your 15.8 will become 17.8 ask of us. So there's a huge unknown there. I appreciate it's out of your control, but that was a huge part of why we had to give you so much extra money last year.
So you're right. We regrettably, neither us really nor any organisation who's a member of the pension fund have that certainty, and it is subject to various movements and assumptions, particularly on what inflation and government gilts will be that are the key variables as to whatever the valuation or interim valuation that comes to pension funds. What we hope to do and what we will continue to do, if that is subject to considerable movement, is to come with an autumn budget revision request to the SCPA for your consideration, and we would look to do that during the course of 2026.
Okay, but I mean, I think we need to be able to identify what the potential risk is of that mid-year revision would be before we think about the overall annual settlement. So it'd be helpful if you had some insight, or because just a simple replication of the numbers. I'm always quite suspicious of forecasts which are identical to this year's actuals.
Well, no, I share your scepticism on it, actually, but I think what we've tried to provide is the best available information that we have. One of the main things that's relevant here is that there's been changes in accounting treatment for some of the pension fund adoption of IFRS 16, and as well as had an impact on our use of, I think the Commission will recall, our use of leases and assets has had a bearing, so pensions plus the IFRS 16 change. We'll continue to engage with the SCPA on pensions and any changes in valuation, and hopefully can. But I just have to recognise there is uncertainty about that number, and just regrettably aspects of it being out with our control.
Okay, thank you. I think that's now on the record. I mean, to be helpful in answer to my original question about why the huge jump, is what I can clearly see is that your people costs in the financial year 24-25 are 23.7 million. Next year, projecting that to be 26.7. So there's an immediate £3 million jump there in people costs. What I can't quite work out is that your headcount is reducing over the same period. So your people costs are rocketing, but your headcount is going down. Now, I can only assume there's two reasons for that. One is you're now absorbing the NI increase, which we helpfully funded last year of £500,000, but you're now absorbing that into people costs. And, of course, your 3.8%. But even then, with those, still doesn't quite add up to such an increase. So how can your people costs be going up so much, by so much, yet you're still forecasting reduced headcount?
So the factors you mentioned are correct. So one is the absorption now of the national insurance costs. You mentioned 3.8%. As well as the 3.8%, there's now a further proposed pay award. So as you'll see from the budget proposal, there's a planned 3% pay award. We don't yet have certainty around that number yet, because we haven't, and Vicky might want to say a bit more about where we are with this. we've not yet received a pay claim from trade union yet for the 26-27 year. And within that, we're assuming 3%. We're not bound by public sector pay awards, but we like to kind of use that as a reference, and that's broadly the number that public bodies are using. We hope to have certainty on that. I think our assumption is that we will, then that's the number we will get to. If it varies, we'll give consideration to how that might be funded differently. The final factor that's relevant is that many of our colleagues are on an incremental pay scale. As well, so
they're going up bands.
So they'll move up. For those colleagues that are not at the top of the scale, they'll move up one of those bands during the course of the year. Just as a final reference point, if it's helpful, if I can get the right page in our budget proposal, we also have submitted just the number of colleagues at each band that's proposed. And that explains why there's changes. But just for completeness, if there's anything that I've missed, Vicky.
No, the key costs are the employer's NI are increments each year, and the pay claim, and we've highlighted that as a risk within our budget. But what we would want to, so we've at the point of doing our budget, the public sector pay policy was at 3%, so that's what we have included in our budget. We expect the pay claim in January. We've had some early discussions with the PCS union. We'd ideally like to agree before we go into the new year, the new financial year, for staff and for budget certainty. But we are aware of the risk in the budget, but we would look to use contingency and efficiencies to meet the additional requirements of any pay pressure as in the first instance.
Okay. And actually, while I've got you on the phone, can I ask about attrition and turnover at Audit Scotland this last year compared to previous years? What's your current rate at the moment?
So our current rate is just under the 10%. I can get the exact figure for turnover, and we discuss that regularly. We monitor that regularly at executive team and also at our remuneration committee, and we're quite comfortable with that. We want a healthy turnover in the organisation as well. So we're comfortable with that level. We don't at the moment either have any problem attracting staff as well when we do go out for recruitment. There was a while particularly that there was concern around in the profession of people wanting to come on board, but we're getting really strong recruitment with the graduates. The pressure point area is more around the qualified accountant role, and we're seeing that right across the system. And whilst we don't want to be complacent, we're very mindful of the pressures in the system that we see in the bodies that we audit. There's quite significant pressure in the finance functions there, and the level of expertise and ability to attract. We are not directly experiencing that ourselves, and are also very aware that we are the trainer, one of the largest trainers of accounting professions in Scotland. So we're mindful of that role we play as well. But we feel that our turnover is healthy and our attraction levels are healthy, which comes back and plays painting the whole big picture if we look at the health of the organisation as well in terms of the changes that are going on. We don't ever want to be complacent about that, but we're quite comfortable with where we are at the moment.
Okay. Why are you proposing a reduction in your training budget next financial year?
It's not an intentional, it's the cycle of, because we've got the numbers of qualified coming through the pipeline of just where we are in the cycle, the 4 reduction of what we need to balance our budget for the number that we've got in at, because it's a 3-year cycle. We've got the number at second years and third years.
Oh, right. Okay.
And we have increased the school leaver and modern apprentices as well.
But you are training your graduates?
Yes.
Good. I want to talk a bit, because we haven't got a huge amount of time, about the future and your modernisation project, which I know you were expecting to come up today. We have looked a little bit about the finances. Mr Oliver talked about the reprofiling of some of the money you thought you were going to spend this year, but now want to move that forward. So just so I can get this correct, of the £430,000 which you expected to spend this financial year but are not, you'll have to, well, you've offered to return that back to the consolidated fund, but are simply asking for it to come back in a loop, essentially. Would there be any benefit in your ability to actually hold and carry money over, rather than this very complicated dance of being kind to give his money back and then coming begging for it the next day? So, could we do this better?
Of course, I think I've kind of got to a place where I think it is what it is. Actually, this is just how this part of the system, by virtue of our status as a body that's funded through the Scottish Administration and subject to consideration, as the Parliament will consider the Budget Act after the draft budget next month. So we're not like some other public bodies, we're not like local government body, we don't hold an ability to hold reserves from one year to the next. Arguably that would be more straightforward. It would avoid the need, when there are timing differences such as the audit modernisation project. But I don't have any expectation or a proposal to the SCPA that we look to change the status of Audit Scotland's funding arrangements. Of relevance related to that is that we are giving a bit of thought as part of some work during 2026 that looks more broadly at our fees and funding arrangements for how we levy fees both to individual public bodies and then on the sectoral approach that we broadly use at the moment, and how that's clear and transparent and understood by people who are subject to a fee for their audit as a public body. But I'm pragmatic, Mr Green. I don't think that's necessarily going to mean that, unless there's a groundswell of support or opinion from the SCPA and across Parliament, to change our status. But I'm always slightly mindful that there may be unintended consequences around some of those changes. Indeed, yeah.
I mean, just on the total cost of this upgrade, it hasn't changed much since we probably last spoke about it, around £2.2 million. My concern primarily around this is that you haven't negotiated the price on the product, but you're still quite confident in what it will cost you. How does that work?
So I will bring Kenny in, actually, but just for the record, actually, I guess there's two parts. The product itself, we do have some certainty on, because we are working with our colleagues in the National Audit Office, so our plan is that we will be using their system. The second component of it is how we become able, the support provider that allows us to use for them to host the system, is where we are, in the process of contractual negotiations. So what we have in our submission is the best information available to us based on earlier discussion engagement with potential suppliers, adopting Crown Commercial Services procurement approaches and how that might go. But of course, there's a degree of uncertainty and risk until we have settled or finalised any of that procurement. But the timing of it is a component of it. So you're right, there's been something of a lift and shift because we weren't able to progress at the pace we had hoped to during 25-26, is that's why the budget has moved with your support into 26-27. But I think it'd be helpful, hopefully, for the Commission to hear from Kenny on this.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as Stephen said, the cost is based on previously submitted information from a range of suppliers. The preferred supplier submitted a range themselves, which was based on 3 different levels of amendments and development work that might be required for the system to be developed into the Scottish environment. And the submission last year was based on an average of those submissions. There's no evidence at this stage that information has moved, has shifted, and we are approaching the contract in the basis of the system lifting and shifting into the Scottish environment with the minimal amendments and developments required. And at this stage, there's no evidence and no indication that that has shifted. For assurance for the committee, when we enter into those contract price negotiations with the supplier, they'll be subject to independent external technical review as to the relevance, appropriateness and consistency of that fixed price.
Would that account for the fact that your legal and professional fees are jumping by a third year on year?
So the main part of that movement is that we'll be into the National Fraud Initiative process that wasn't part of our, it's every 2 years, so that wasn't part of the...
So just clarify that 250k NFI money, but that's in addition to the revenue ask of us as well. You're asking for a one-off payment for that.
That's correct.
But you're also including it in the legal and professional fees line of the budget?
Yes, that's where it's reflected in the budget.
Right, oh, I see. So it's in the 15.8 already, not on top of, just to clarify. Because if it's in that line, then it'll appear.
It's included. It's not double counted.
It's not okay. Not that I suggested it would be, but just want to clarify where it's at. I guess my big issue with this is I'm yet to see a public body that's delivered a massive IT infrastructure upgrade on time and on budget. Now, if Audit Scotland can't do it, then nobody can do it. So I appreciate there's a huge amount of pressure on you to deliver on that. But of course, that's just the implementation cost. This is presumably the cost of getting the product live. What is really unclear is what the ongoing costs may be down the line. I appreciate that it's not relevant next year because it's not live next year, but it will be to future commissions to concern them. What sort of scale do you have in mind for that?
I would hesitate to throw figures at you, but I think what we have in our submission gets us to the right starting place, and probably really, in addition to that, is more of a catch-up. The system that we have is no longer fit for purpose. We have squeezed it to get us to the right place, and I think, as Colin has also mentioned, is that things will continue to change. So this system will use aspects of automation, but it's the right platform for us to then allow, together with the National Audit Office and potentially other audit agencies in the UK, bring in other features. So artificial intelligence, new approaches, better cope with new standards. The baseline of that is something we'll continue to engage with the SCPA for what that means in future cost requests. But I think what I'm hopeful this submission is that Audit Scotland and probably public bodies across the piece will have to adopt technology more quickly than we have done in years gone by. That will be the feature of how both public audit and public services will be delivered. We'll look to continue engaging with you through both the annual budget submission request and through our annual report and at regular intervals in between. I think we are hopeful, as soon as we get into the procurement process, that we'll have some certainty, both what it will take to deliver this, and then thereafter the ongoing running and maintenance of it.
Okay, thank you. My final question is slightly different, and that's one of risk. Given where you're headed, the direction of travel with your modernisation project, it seems to be that it will be very heavily reliant on Microsoft Cloud for data storage and access. This very Parliament that we're sitting in knows very well what happens when that goes down. It can thwart day-to-day business to the point of thwarting democracy almost. So I do have concerns that you're moving to an entirely virtual model. I'm really looking for some reassurances that you are able to operate on a day-to-day basis in any scenario. Particularly given, and that's before you look at the third-party involvement or other types of espionage that have happened in other public bodies already that we know are actively happening. So I'm not necessarily wondering how wonderful your security systems are, but we do know these systems go down and affect us because it's happened to us, so it could happen to you.
Yeah, of course it could, and I think maybe a couple of things. Kenny and Vicky will give some insight into how we are currently mitigating some of those risks or trying to, and what that might mean for the future. Cyber risk occupies the top 2 places on our risk register. So the risk of a cyber attack and then our ability to recover from it. For obvious reasons, I won't spell out what we do and how we do that. But is subject to regular monitoring, both at the executive team, the audit committee and the board, that we have appropriate arrangements for the type of organisation that we are. But we recognise that any organisation of scale and size in public and commercial setting carries this risk, and and can be subject, as we've seen many high-profile examples across commercial organisations and public bodies who have been subject. So we have processes in place in terms of business continuity to allow us to do what we need to deliver services, and then map out a process of recovery as well. But I think in terms of some of the technicalities, Kenny, maybe you want to come in first, and then Vicky wants to add.
Thank you. Yes, actually, one of the key rationale for the modernisation project in the direction of travel is to increase our cyber resilience and to address cyber risks in our current system, which currently lacks the automation and secure modern architecture to support longer-term cyber resilience. So working closely with our digital services team to mitigate those risks as they present themselves now. And as Stephen has said, we have contingencies and processes and plans in place should the need arise. The move to the Apex system, which does exist in the Microsoft environment, brings it in line with the other systems and tools that we have in place. They will be interoperable and will share protections and securities across the piece, increasing the architecture and framework around those. But as Stephen says, this is consistently highest risk on our risk register, and therefore requires active and careful monitoring and controls in place, which we have and are subject to rigour and independent review on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you. Good old-fashioned spreadsheets. We'll be back out soon enough.
Maybe, oh, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick couple of questions from myself. In your covering letter to the Commission, you state in page 2, we're taking on a higher level of operational and financial risk in the 26-27 proposal compared with previous years. And the pay award, that's understood. You do say in paragraph 6 of the budget proposals that you would firstly use your contingency plan or contingency money to meet any pressures that came from that. But you might have to come back to the Commission if that was insufficient. The other thing you highlighted as high level of operational and financial risk is the 5%. And sorry to circle back about that. And again in paragraph 6 you state that that vacancy factor will remain a challenge. So, these are two key areas that have a high level of risk, both financial and operational, around them. To ask the obvious question, how are you managing them?
So I think maybe trying to take each of those in turn. So the pay award, we think we have an appropriate assumption in our budget submission of 3%. It's subject, first of all, to receipt of the pay claim, and then through the structured negotiation arrangements that we have with the trade union to arrive at a single year pay award we expect for 26-27. I think at the moment we don't know much more beyond that. We think it's the right reference point, given, as I mentioned, we're not subject to public sector pay, but we want to make it with reference to other public bodies, including the Scottish Parliament, as to what pay award it settles on. We do have the management contingency arrangement, for good reason. We think, and perhaps referencing the discussion, is we're not able to hold reserves, so it allows us some flexibility as events arise. As you mentioned, the vacancy factor arrangement now also being at 5%. It is a bit like starting, each new financial year in theory with a blank sheet of paper and trying to deliver upon that number. But maybe I think, as Vicky's outlined, is that through regular engagement with our colleagues across business groups, we do have some certainty to a degree about what's coming down the line in terms of some staff changes. The turnover level that we're operating to also allows us to make some inroads into managing that risk without fully mitigating it, Chair. And then also, some of the other kind of contextual changes in the organisation are some of the system developments too. We don't have price certainty entirely yet about the implementation of the audit modernisation process. So I think what we wanted to do is just to set out a clear picture in today's budget submission that there are risks. There's risks in any organisation, of course there are. So there's not necessarily entire predictability in our budget, but with the right structures, governance arrangements, is that we have got arrangements to manage these risks as well as any organisation that's well run can do. If things change, if there's significant variation in the variables that we've set out, we would look to continue having that engagement with the SCPA. And we hope that that's not the case based on the submission that you have before you today.
Just turning a slightly different thing, paragraph 46 on the submission says that legislation requires us to broadly break even. What does broadly break even mean? I mean, does that mean if you go a few $100,000 the wrong way, that's okay? Or
no, it's not quite as flexible as that, unfortunately. We are required not to go into deficit each year. This, in terms of, in respect of our audit fees, in terms of our overall position, we will never go into deficit. That is our key financial target. As I'm very clear, and that the external auditors appointed by the SCPA would result in them considering how they would reflect that in their audit opinion. Clearly, the organisation that we are, we would not want to be in a situation to have a modified opinion on Audit Scotland's accounts. This is in respect of the fee and the income arrangements that we have by sector that relates to broadly breaking even. We're looking carefully at that, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, as part of consideration of fees and funding, and looking to engage with the SCPA, Parliament and public bodies about how that operates appropriately, so that we're recovering our costs on individual bodies as kind of the likely direction of travel, rather than on a sectoral basis where we broadly break even at the moment. But it's something we're looking forward to discussing more with the SCPA during 2026.
And on table 5 on page 18, I notice that for local authorities, actual versus budget, of course, is much higher, and in the proposed budget, these fees are going to stay at a high rate. We previously talked about transfer pricing and so on, and concerns about that. Other bodies don't seem to have as big increases, if any, than the local authorities. So why are the local authorities paying so much more?
I'll ask Vicky to say that. I think in broad terms, as we touched on earlier in the session, audit fees can vary, especially with the implementation of new auditing or accounting standards. One of the main factors that's been affecting the delivery of audit work in local government bodies is pensions and valuation of assets. That has required considerably more audit work than had previously been the case. It's actually subject to a lot of debate and discussion within local government and the auditing profession. Because what we effectively have is the application of commercial accounting and auditing requirements in a local government or our public body setting. There are many who are concerned about what that means in terms of, as the Commission will be familiar about, the pace of the delivery of some of local government audits has been really constrained in recent years. And one of the main factors behind that is the valuation of assets. We've thankfully been able to hold the line, and it hasn't significantly affected the delivery of audits, but there has been some cost growth as auditors have had to do more work, and public bodies too, for that matter, Chair, just so that they can produce a set of annual report and accounts that meet the required standards and quality. But Vicky, you want to say a bit more about that?
Yeah, so the fee increase is applied to all sectors, at 4.3%. So all sectors have that because the sectors are required to fund. We can't cross-subsidise any sector. There'll be elements that so Scottish Government departments, etc., will be covered by the consolidated fund, but local government is all, including performance audit, all funded through their fees.
Thank you. And on that, I'll ask members if they've got any last questions that they would like to ask. Yes, Mark.
Just a couple of brief questions. I think we got a good answer from Workus earlier on just about the reductions in property costs, but I just wanted to ask about the £50,000 property cost saving in relation to the Edinburgh office, what the background to that was.
Thank you. So the £50,000 in savings in the Edinburgh office, that is due to savings in rates, as well as utility bills, maintenance costs. It's a combination of those factors that's resulted in that saving of £50,000. So the 270 that we referenced earlier is that £50,000 as well as the £220,000 that's arising from our 10-year estate strategy.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that exhausts all the questions we've got to ask at this point. So I'll thank Colin, Auditor General, Vicky, Kenny and Wakas for their evidence this afternoon, and I'll move the meeting into private session. Thank you. And Merry Christmas.